known.
Good morning or good afternoon, and welcome to the Women and the Americans with Disabilities Act webinar. My name is Kelly Jenkins-Poltz, and I'm the Regional Administrator for the Women's Bureau Region 9 office in San Francisco. Before we get started, I wanted to let everyone know that this session is being recorded, and we will put a copy of it on the Women's Bureau website at a future date. In commemoration of the 25th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, we felt it was important to reflect on the impact of this landmark legislation and explore some of the unique issues facing women with disabilities. Last week, the Women's Bureau National Office released an issue brief that outlined some of the key economic, employment, and educational characteristics of women with disabilities. And our speakers will touch on these issues as well. The Women's Bureau also released a guide for employers that provides information on working women with disabilities and articulates the business case for hiring individuals with disabilities. The guide seeks to dispel some of the myths that might discourage employers from hiring individuals with disabilities. For example, research shows that half of requested workplace accommodations cost nothing to implement, and the remainder generally costs less than $500. The guide also details a variety of tax deductions and credits employers can access when they accommodate workers with disabilities at their workplaces. Both of these new publications are on the Women's Bureau website, in addition to other new resources the Department of Labor has created, including a timeline of the ADA, worker stories, an inclusive internship guide, and more. And we encourage you to pull these resources up, and please share them widely with those in your networks. We have three distinguished speakers with us today: Jennifer Sheehy from the Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy in Washington, D.C., Rachel Langston with Legal Aid Society Employment Law Center in San Francisco, and Anna Darzens from the University of California, Berkeley School of Social Welfare. I will introduce each speaker separately, and after all have completed their presentations, we'll have about 30 minutes for questions from our audience. We'll try to get to as many of those questions as we can. So if you're listening, as you're listening, please use the chat box on the bottom right half of your screen to type in a question as you think of it. And my colleague, Anna Fortes, will pull those questions up for our speakers during the very last hour of our webinar. And now I'm going to start by introducing our first speaker, Jennifer Sheehy. Jennifer is Deputy Assistant Secretary and Acting Assistant Secretary for the Office of Disability Employment Policy, also known as ODEP, at the U.S. Department of Labor. The mission of ODEP is to develop policies to increase the number and the quality of employment opportunities for youth and adults with disabilities. Prior to her current position, Jennifer spent 10 years at the U.S. Department of Education in many roles, including Acting Director of the National Institute on Disability and Rehabilitation Research, Acting Deputy Commissioner of the Rehabilitation Services Administration, and Special Assistant to the Assistant Secretary of Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services. Jennifer came to the Department of Education from the Presidential Task Force on Employment of Adults with Disabilities, where she was Senior Policy Advisor and served a detail as Associate Director in the White House Domestic Policy Council. Before she joined the task force staff, Jennifer was Vice President of the National Organization on Disability and Director of its CEO Council. She's worked for Marriott, Sheraton, and Anheuser-Busch, and has received many civic and leadership honors. Jennifer earned a BA from Cornell University and an MBA from Georgetown University. And we are so delighted that she can join us today. And now I'll turn it over to Jennifer Sheehy.
Thank you so much, Kelly, and thank you, everyone, for participating in this webinar. We are so thrilled to have the Women's Bureau participate with us in the Office of Disability Employment Policy to celebrate the Americans with Disabilities Act anniversary. And I am so proud to say that our Secretary Tom Perez, has really led the department in including all offices in the ADA celebration. In fact, I'll talk a little bit more about it later, but we have a fantastic interactive website that you can go to and see how every office in DOL has participated. There have been activities, deliverables, that's a government term, and messages, blogs, lots of videos, everything, personal stories to celebrate the ADA. And it's fantastic to have a leader who directs all the efforts of a 16,000-person organization to focus on issues such as disability issues. The Office of Disability Employment Policy mission is to make sure, next slide please, is to make sure that all people, including people with disabilities, have access to and can receive services from the public workforce system and other federal and state programs that serve job seekers with disabilities and employees with disabilities. We develop and influence policies and practices to increase the number and quality of employment opportunities for people with disabilities. To fulfill this mission, ODEP never works by itself. We work with partners like the Women's Bureau to encourage and direct policies and practices towards the adoption of practices that increase employment for people with disabilities. And that includes states, employers, federal agencies. We work with Congress and the White House to really make sure that we are developing and testing and coming up with evidence-based practices so that people with disabilities are front and center in the diversity agenda and not sidelined or an afterthought. Next slide, please. So this is just a snapshot and the link to our ADA timeline, our interactive website on the Department of Labor's ADA feature. We have personal stories and snippets from legislation going back as early as 1920 up through the ADA in 1990 and after that really show the progression of employment for people with disabilities. If you look back in 1920, some of the programs that were created were all for the right intentions, but they were created as separate programs where people with disabilities were really isolated in workshops or in facilities where they would do their work and go home and very rarely interact with people without disabilities or in their community. From there and up to the Americans with Disabilities Act, their focus was really on access to other programs, to schools, to work environments, to public facilities. And that was an incredible achievement at the time. We are since then really focused on inclusion and equality so that people with disabilities are part of the mainstream and very much an equal part of, as I said, the diversity agenda with other populations and other communities that are as important to the diverse and complex profile of the workforce and of our community in the nation. Now we're not just even focusing on inclusion, we're focusing on universal design. So that means that technology or buildings, homes, the workplace, it's a seamless inclusion of people with disabilities. What works often for people with disabilities often works for everyone. You know that with curb cuts, that was something that was one of the early accommodations for people with disabilities. But even as much as some of the technology today, some of the features on your iPhone or larger fonts or even voice recognition software for people with disabilities, everybody can use those. I personally use a wheelchair and use voice recognition software that lets me type 150 words a minute. Who wouldn't want to have that capability? Well, that's software that's available to every DOL employee. And generally, if you have it in your company, it's available to everyone in the company. So next slide, please. Employment, we consider, and the Secretary has said this, is really the unfinished business of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and what we in ODEP and the Department of Labor are really going to focus on for the future, because we have a long way to go. Next slide, please. Women with disabilities, as you know, represent more than 1 in 20 working-age Americans. 11% of those working-age Americans are living with one or more disabilities, but the employment rate of women with disabilities is only 32%. And, of course, the national average is around, of participation is around 80%. So you can see what the difference is there. Next slide, please. Talking about the wage gap for a moment, and I think this is a good time to mention another one of Secretary Perez's strong philosophies, is that workers' rights are disability rights and vice versa. We really need to make sure that disability and women with disabilities are involved in every policy that the Department of Labor works on, from minimum wage to paid leave to access for people with disabilities. It's all about getting every person who has a talent and a desire to work to make sure they have the opportunity to do that. So some of the statistics, as you can see here, are things that, they're snapshots of the environment that really gives us our urgency and direction to work on these issues. 60 cents to every dollar earned by women compared to able-bodied men. 72% or 72 cents to every dollar earned by men with disabilities, and 80 cents to every dollar earned by their non-disabled female counterparts. With a poverty rate of 29.5%, we know that work is the difference and the solution. Next slide, please. I'm going to just mention very briefly the rates of abuse with women with disabilities, because our next speaker, one of our speakers, will talk more about this. But 83% of females and 32% of males with developmental disabilities have sadly experienced sexual assault. 37.3% of women with disabilities have experienced some kind of violent abuse in their lifetime, and 28.5% have been threatened with violence. Next slide, please. So what are the strategies and some of the solutions to really address these urgent and critical issues? First, this is doubly important because women with disabilities face a double type of discrimination. We need to reduce biases towards girls and young women with disabilities early intervention, raising those expectations at the youngest age possible is really what is needed. At ODEP, and we'll give you a link to our resources later, we work very, very closely with the adult workforce systems, but we have a dedicated youth policy team that studies at length the strategies that will help young people with disabilities and the barriers that face them now. And we do this with other agencies. We just had a federal partners in transition strategic plan issued that involved the Health and Human Services Agency, Social Security Administration, and of course Department of Education to streamline the services, to make recommendations to improve policies so that young people with disabilities do not have to know the 12 different agencies and benefits they have available to them. We've got to do a better job streamlining and giving access and looking at this from a customer-centered focus. We have to increase early access and participation in the science, technology, engineering, and math fields. And there's a great example to illustrate this point. Microsoft has a DigiGirls initiative that takes middle school girls and really helps them develop and and ignite their interest in STEM fields. They work with a program called Do It. That's Disabilities, Opportunities, Internetworking, and Technology. Because, again, people with disabilities can't be left out. They can't be an afterthought. They can't be sidelined because nothing will change unless they're part of the central component of a program's approach. We've got to improve education to career transition efforts, and our federal partners in transition work is doing that. We also have a guide for success or a guidepost for success on our website that talks specifically about strategies for young people with disabilities, their families, and as well as teachers and others that interact with them. Got to get more people, women with disabilities, into post-secondary educational attainment, reduce isolation, build those community connections, and continue to promote employer-oriented promising practices. Next slide, please. So how do we improve those business practices? We have several resources, again, on the ODEP website specifically for employers, and one of them is the fantastic Business Strategies That Work. It's been updated and used by thousands of employers. Some of the strategies that they recommend, and that these have also been tested and validated. The employers that have an inclusive environment or work to make sure that their application process, their hiring process, their training, their HR processes, their employee development processes, business resource groups, mentoring, even in their marketing, when they include people with disabilities as a component, then they create an atmosphere where people not only recognize them as employer-friendly, disability-friendly employers, but also help their own employees feel comfortable to reach out and ask for accommodations when they need it. Maybe they're aging and they age into a disability. Maybe they have an injury and they want to know that their employer is a receptive employer when they return. But these are all important strategies to make sure that employees with disabilities are engaged and productive and not trying to hide or mitigate a disability, which of course takes a lot of effort. There is an author, Bryant McGill, who said all discomfort comes from suppressing your true identity. If we have an environment that allows people to bring their full identities, including all their differences that make them a whole person, to work, then you are creating a happier, more engaged, productive workplace. It benefits everybody, as you can see. We need the accommodations to be available for people with disabilities. One promising best practice is to make sure that all employees, when they're hired, have some aspect of their orientation around accommodations that are available and how to access them, because you actually never know if someone has a disability. And you want to make sure that everyone understands the beginning of the hiring and their involvement with the company, that these fantastic supports are available. They need to be available in the recruitment, training, and development processes. And, of course, information sharing and awareness raising is a good strategy to maintain that inclusive culture. One of the policies that our Office of Federal Contract Compliance Program introduced and that went into effect in March 2015 is Section 503 of the Rehabilitation Act. In more user-friendly terms, this is a provision that affects federal contractors and sets an aspirational goal of 7% people with disabilities in their workforce. There are new data collection requirements and reporting requirements that measure the progress of a company towards meeting that goal. There are no sanctions if you don't make the goal. There are sanctions if a company is not showing that they are taking steps to improve their processes and the number of people with disabilities that they have. Next slide, please. I did want to mention, because we have a fantastic event coming up, that there is a Federal Partners Committee on Women in Trauma. This is chaired by the Department of Labor and co-chaired by Health and Human Services and the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. As you can see, it involves several agencies. It's been active for a long time. They have recently posted an updated fact sheet, and the link is available to you on your slides. The event coming up is Building a Trauma-Informed Nation, Moving the Conversation into Action, September 29th and 30th this year at the Department of Labor and online through sites around the country. The Women's Bureau will share details later this summer with stakeholders. So before I end, next slide, please, I just want to point out some resources that we have for folks should they want more information. The ODEP website, easydol.gov/ODEP. And then we do have resources specific to women with disabilities. One that I wanted to point out is our campaign for disability employment. This has been a very successful public awareness campaign. It involves public service announcements. The one that we released last year was in the top 1% of Nielsen ratings. The one we just released is on track to exceed that performance, and several women are featured on our PSA. So I encourage you to use that if you can, if it would be helpful when you recognize events like ADA anniversaries or October Disability Employment Awareness Month, or in your own inclusion efforts in your company or your organization. Another resource is Job Accommodation Network. This is a confidential call-in, email resource where employers or individuals with disabilities can call and get specific information about accommodations that would work for that individual. I've used it myself for people, and it's logged in more than 300,000 calls in its history. So we know it's successful, and it's one of the better recognized resources that we have, so we encourage you to use that as well. And finally, the Employer Assistance in Resource Network, AskEarn.org. This is a resource for employers. It includes our business strategies that work, information on new compliance requirements with different programs, but most importantly, how to create an inclusive environment so your employees are not only engaged, but you avoid any problems in the future. So I want to thank the Women's Bureau today, our secretary, and all of you for participating in this very important and timely topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was really a great overview. For the participants in our webinar today, if you have a question that you'd like to pose to Jennifer or to any of our other speakers, just a reminder that you can use our chat box on the lower right half of your screen, and we'll pull those questions back up during our question and answer at the end of the webinar. Our next speaker is Rachel Langston. Rachel is a staff attorney in the Gender Equity and Disability Rights Programs at the Legal Aid Society Employment Law Center. She joined the LES-ELC in 2008, and she advises and represents workers with disabilities with a primary focus on disability discrimination and failure to accommodate in the workplace. Rachel also provides community education regarding the rights of employees with disabilities and participates in legislative advocacy to expand the rights of workers who have familial caregiving responsibilities. She is a passionate advocate for women, and she was recently appointed to chair the City of San Francisco's Equal Pay Advisory Board. She received her JD in 2008 from the University of California, Berkeley, and her BA from Texas Tech University in 2005. And we're so pleased that Rachel could join us. And now I'll turn it over to Rachel Langston.
Thank you, Kelly. If we go ahead and go to next slide, please. So as Kelly noted, I work in several different programs at the Legal Aid Society Employment Law Center. I work as an attorney in our disability program, but also do a lot of work in our gender and LGBT program, as well as our work and family program, which does a lot with the needs of pregnant women at the workplace. I work with issues involving survivors of domestic violence, and also work for people or help people who have familial caregiving responsibilities. And in doing all of this work, at the same time, basically, I've come to see how these laws, and especially the ADA, tends to interact with the other laws that protect other communities, and tends to sort of be a gap filler where there may not be some protection that's immediately obvious for someone who has recently given birth or for someone who is dealing with a domestic violence situation. A lot of times the ADA can sort of come in surprising ways and provide some needed protections where they may at first seem to be lacking. So I'd like to talk about those different communities and how the ADA can sometimes provide specific protections, especially to women who are pregnant or who have recently given birth, to individuals who are survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking, which largely affects women, although it affects men as well, and also people who have caregiving responsibilities for children, parents, or other family members. Again, caregivers in this day and age, it's still many women provide caregiving to family members, and so this is an issue that largely affects women. So in all three of these arenas, the ADA can come in and provide some protections that may not be immediately obvious when you think about it at first. Next slide, please. So pregnancy and childbirth is a big area where the ADA can come in and fill some gaps where there may not be protections available. So obviously, or maybe not obviously, but pregnancy itself is not a disability. And there are some non-ADA legal protections available for pregnant women and new mothers. So for instance, the Pregnancy Disability Act, the federal protection that prohibits discrimination against women based on pregnancy and requires that they be treated the same as non-pregnant employees. There's also the Family Medical Leave Act, which many of you may be familiar with, which provides up to 12 weeks of job-protected unpaid leave during the time that a woman is unable to work due to pregnancy, or time that she's bonding with her new child. There are some states, including California, where I'm located, that do provide some additional protections. California's Pregnancy Disability Leave Law provides up to 4 months of leave, up to 4 months of leave for women while they are disabled from working due to pregnancy. A lot of states don't have that, though, and so it may at first glance seem that you have the 12 weeks and then you're out of luck if you need more time because you're disabled for longer due to pregnancy, which is often the case for various reasons. For instance, many women experience postpartum depression after childbirth and may need more time off from work to recover from that. Or there may be some complications earlier in the pregnancy, and you may need to take more time while pregnant than the 12 weeks provides. And so this is a place where the ADA can come in and does come in and protects women who have disabilities, as disabilities are considered under the ADA, that will provide them that entitle them to reasonable accommodations, which can include a extended leave of absence beyond the 12 weeks of the FMLA. And we'll talk about what some of those disabilities could be in a moment. So there are also other accommodations that the ADA may entitle pregnant women or new mothers to, for instance, if they need lifting restrictions, weight-bearing restrictions, the restrictions from climbing ladders, things like that. The ADA may well step in to entitle them to an accommodation during or following pregnancy that enable them to keep working, but with slightly modified duties. Next slide, please. So interestingly, there's been a lot of changes both to the ADA lately. There was a recent case, Young versus UPS, that has made it clear that the ADA also has some indirect effects on pregnant women or new mothers who may not necessarily be themselves considered disabled, but still need restrictions. For instance, in the Young case, Young's doctor had required that there be a lifting restriction there. She didn't per se have anything that could be considered a disability, which is a substantial limitation that limits a major life activity. But she still had this restriction to ensure that the pregnancy, that she was safe during her pregnancy and maintained her health. And so the court in the Young case basically did find that the Pregnancy Discrimination Act does require that women disabled by pregnancy be treated the same as other persons not so affected, but similar in their ability or inability to work. And that could be a little tricky. Before 2008, the ADA was pretty restrictive due to some unfortunate court cases and what it considered to be a disability. It required that a disability, or the courts interpreted it to require that a disability be relatively long-term, that it not be able to be mitigated by some sort of medical, like a prosthetic device or insulin for insulin-dependent disabilities. If you could mitigate it, it wasn't necessarily a disability. So there were a lot of restrictions that really limited the pool of what could be considered a disability. In 2008, the ADA Amendments Act clarified that that was never Congress's intention, and that it should not be such a high barrier for people to demonstrate that they have a disability. Disabilities could be shorter term. They could affect many things, affected bodily system, like a reproductive system or cardiovascular system, could be the sort of major life activity that is affected by that could constitute a disability under the Amendments Act. So basically, after 2008, it became much easier to demonstrate that someone had a disability, and many more conditions were considered disabilities under that act. So what that does is it creates a larger group of comparators for pregnant women and new mothers. And Young, part of the issue was, who is her comparator? Who else has a relatively short-term condition that limits their lifting restriction? And there weren't a lot of people that had that, and that their employer therefore had to allow them some sort of modification or accommodation. But now, many disabilities, even if they are shorter term, are still considered disabilities under the ADA. So if someone has a relatively short-term condition that is not pregnancy, but that requires an accommodation, a reasonable accommodation under the ADA that limits their lifting capabilities, then a pregnant woman who had that same need might well be required under the Young decision and under how the Pregnancy Discrimination Act is now determined, her employer might well be required to provide her the same sorts of accommodations that it provides someone else with a relatively short-term disability. And since the employer is now required to provide an accommodation to something that is a relatively shorter-term disability, that comparator exists. And so they're more likely to have to treat a pregnant woman the same way, even if it's a shorter-term situation. So there's a lot to it. It's still kind of an evolving area of the law, but it's very interesting. And at the very least, you know, if there are conditions, even cesarean sections, that there's a need for a C-section, and that increases the time a woman may need off for leave. These are all areas where the ADA can really come in and supplement the existing pregnancy laws to provide for accommodations at work or extended leaves in order to eventually go back to work following a pregnancy. Next slide, please. So another area that I work a lot with is employment issues that arise for survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. Employment may not at first blush seem like an immediate issue that confronts individuals dealing with this type of violence, but it really does affect employment when you are dealing with these issues, trying to escape the violence, trying to recover from the assault. It can affect your employment. It can require that you take time off for various reasons, and it can affect the way that you're able to work and your comfort while at work. And so in this way, the ADA can certainly come in and provide a tool through the accommodations that it entitles people with disabilities to that could really help people in these situations. It could be something that is quite obvious. For instance, if someone is injured physically in a domestic violence, because of domestic violence, then they may be entitled to an accommodation to leave, to stay home while they recover, to have a modification while at work, enabling them to do their job. But there's also often psychological disabilities associated with these types of violence. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is a common disability that we see in the survivors that we work with. And interestingly, the PTSD is considered a disability under the ADA. And interestingly, the accommodations that might be provided or requested under the ADA that would be a reasonable accommodation for something like PTSD or depression or another psychological disability resulting from domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking, those accommodations might also be a way to get a safer workplace or to maintain one's safety at the workplace. So for instance, if someone has PTSD and is triggered by fear of their assailant coming to the workplace, whether or not that is something that is likely to happen, it might be a reasonable accommodation for them to request something like a transfer. So if someone had an issue where they were assaulted at work, even if that's unlikely to happen again, they could request a transfer in order to address their PTSD. Or, as I said, leaves of absence. And I bring that one up a lot because that's a really common accommodation that people don't often think about in various situations because we do have FMLA and other leave laws, but leaves of absence are common accommodations under the ADA and effective accommodations that really enable someone to be able to take care of themselves and then to come back to work. So, for instance, if someone is a survivor of domestic violence and needs to recover from a physical injury, a psychological injury, and needs some time off, that could be a possibility under the ADA. The same, and going back to the PTSD example, if someone one potential accommodation may be the installation of security equipment or something like that at work to make them feel safer at work and to mitigate the triggers associated with their PTSD. In California, we recently had a law that amended our labor code that requires reasonable safety-related accommodations like these. But in other states where those are not yet available, these same accommodations may also be responsive and appropriate for as accommodations for a disability. So that's something worth thinking about in your workplaces. Next slide, please. And then the last area where the ADA can sometimes come up and be helpful, but is not yet quite helpful enough, we need more legislation here, is where there are familial caregiving responsibilities. Again, this is an area where the FMLA can come in if you have a family member, a child with a disability, and you have to take time off to provide care, and that disability is also a serious health condition, which many disabilities are. You might be able to take FMLA to provide that care. But that doesn't help if you have ongoing caregiving needs that really require a modified schedule or a flexible schedule or something like that. What the ADA does provide and how it is responsive in a relatively small way is its associational provision, which basically means that an employer cannot discriminate against someone because they have an association with someone who has a disability. But this is limited. So for instance, what it could do is if someone applies for a job or applies for a promotion and her employer knows that she has a child with a disability and makes the assumption that therefore she would have to be out of work a lot or would be otherwise unavailable to do certain things because she has this child at home with a disability, then that would be unlawful under the ADA. However, we've not yet gotten so far as to have protections for people who really do need accommodations because of their caregiving responsibilities. So if that same mother came to her employer and said, you know, look, I really need to shift my schedule around so that I'm working these hours so that I can take my son to his standing doctor's appointment every day from 8 to 9 or something like that. The employer, under the ADA at least, is not required to accommodate that caregiver in order to ensure that she's able to take care of her son. So it's helpful insofar as if there are someone cannot be discriminated against, but that doesn't mean that they have to be accommodated in order to provide care to their child with a disability or other family member with a disability. So that we do have a little ways to go as far as that's concerned, and that's something that at the Employment Law Center we do get calls from caregivers who really are needing some of those protections, and we're just not there yet. In California, we're making some progress with other legislation. In San Francisco, we have the Family Friendly Workplace Ordinance, which allows family members to ask for a flexible schedule or a predictable schedule. We have, you know, some other laws like the FMLA and the California version of that. But all in all, it's still not enough, and we still have a ways to go in this arena. And it's a really important issue that affects a lot of people and their families. And so the ADA is a start and with its associational provision and protections related to that, but we still have a little ways to go. And so with that, I will pass it back to Kelly.
Thank you so much, Rachel. It was a great overview. If you have a question that you want to ask Rachel or any of our other speakers, please use the chat box on the lower right half of your screen. We've gotten about 4 questions so far, and we'll probably have time for a couple more, so please go ahead and send us a question as you think of it. Our final speaker is Anna Darzens. Anna held the Haas Scholars Fellowship at the University of California, Berkeley School of Social Welfare and graduated with honors, university high honors, and with a minor in disability studies. During Anna's time at UC Berkeley, she was a member of Phi Beta Kappa and Sigma Alpha Lambda Honor Societies. For the last 7 years, Anna has worked in the Disabled Services and Programs for Students at Sacramento City College, and she begins a new job with Elika Health Centers next week. Her research, Women with Disabilities in Domestic Violence, a Neglected Problem, was published this spring in the Social Justice Review Journal. We're very glad that she can join us to share some of that research with us. And now I'll turn it over to Anna Darzens.
Good morning and afternoon. I would like to thank all of you for joining us today. My name is Anna Darzens. My research is about women with disabilities who have been abused, specifically focusing on their access to domestic violence services. I would like to introduce my research by relating the following story. The story I'm about to tell represents the types of situations that time and time again women with disabilities face when attempting to access abuse-related services. To protect this woman's confidentiality, I will refer to her using an alias. Jane is a woman who is newly blind, without blind skills training, who also uses a wheelchair. She lived with her sister, who provided her day-to-day care and also abused her. Jane's sister would cause injuries that would require medical attention and an ambulance, because she liked to pretend that she had saved Jane's life to first responders and medical staff. When Jane, who was highly socially isolated, found her way to domestic violence services, they turned her away. The person behind the desk told her that they could not help her because her disability required her to have personal assistance, so she could not take care of herself, and she was told that since the person abusing her was not an intimate partner, it was not domestic violence. So she was sent back. Jane stayed with her sister for many months until she had the opportunity to ask someone to find help for her. This person, called Adult Protective Services, commonly referred to as APS, an investigator came out to the house and interviewed Jane in front of her abuser. When the APS investigator left, she handed this newly blind woman a card that she would not be able to use because she could not see it, and told her to call if she needed help, and then left Jane there. Many months passed. The next time, Jane called someone at her church to come to her house. She asked them to walk up and open the door so that she could roll her chair out to safety. She waited by the door for the person to arrive. She waited knowing that at any moment she could be noticed by her abuser because Jane was never left alone. This time, when she made it out, the police were called. After calling Jane's abuser, the officers did not feel as though there was sufficient evidence of a crime, so her sister was not arrested and APS was called. APS took her to a seedy hotel where she stayed by herself without the personal assistance that she needed until she was taken to an assisted living facility where she was abused again by staff there. This story is a typical example of the ways that women with disabilities experience the attempts to access abuse-related support services. Next slide, please. Research in this area is limited, but does exist. By the most conservative estimates, women with disabilities are 3 times more likely to experience abuse than their non-disabled peers, and some studies have put that rate closer to 11 times more. The most vulnerable of these groups are women who have developmental disabilities and or have psychiatric diagnosis. It is critical that we understand and respond to the service needs of this population by asking, how are women with disabilities who experience abuse accessing services? At this point, I'd like to pause for a moment and give some clarifying definitions. First, I'll start with the official definition for domestic violence. According to the United States Department of Justice, domestic violence is a pattern of abusive behavior in any relationship that is used by one partner to gain or maintain power and control over another intimate partner. I ask that you take notice of the phrase intimate partner in this definition. During this presentation, when I speak of domestic violence services, I will be referring to shelters and safe houses, counseling, and legal assistance. I will use the term women with disabilities because it's preferred by the disability community, because it emphasizes the person before the condition, This difference becomes quite meaningful because people with disabilities are used to others noticing and referring to them by their disability. Types of abuse will include physical, sexual, emotional, economic, threats that intimidate, manipulate, humiliate, isolate, frighten, terrorize, or coerce. This study also includes disability abuse. This type of abuse makes use of the victim's disability status and includes assaults perpetrated by disability service providers and their staff. And this abuse includes the withholding of necessary assistance and or medications. During our discussion, we will use domestic violence to refer to all of the forms of abuse mentioned. I am using the Americans with Disabilities Act definition of disability as having one or more functional limitations that substantially limits one or more daily life activities. I selected this broad definition because often when women with disabilities are studied, they're segregated into categories that focus again on their disability, on their functional limitation and impairment. Using this broad definition allows me to include a larger number of women who identify as having a disability, giving them a chance to speak out and feel heard. Next slide, please. So now with our clarifying definitions in mind, what I was trying to find out is, are domestic violence services provided to women with disabilities? How does disability status influence women's decisions to seek help? And if women with disabilities decide to seek help, do they have access to the help that they need? In order to answer these questions, I collected anonymous surveys from domestic violence service providers and disability service providers and conducted in-person interviews with women who have disabilities and have also been abused. Next slide, please. I asked domestic violence service providers if they are knowingly serving women with disabilities, and if they are, how many women with disabilities do they serve per year, and inquired about the types of accommodations they are prepared to provide. I also collected anonymous surveys from disability service providers in order to uncover whether or not they are asking their clients about experiencing abuse, and if so, do they offer any relevant abuse services, or do they refer their clients out to domestic violence services? Ordinarily, research about women with disabilities is done through the lens of an expert, a service provider who speaks about the needs of persons with disabilities, but who may not really have much knowledge about the lived experiences of this group. For this reason, this study included women by asking them if they were able to access domestic violence or abuse-related services, and inquired about how their disability status influenced their knowledge and choices. Next slide, please. I sent online surveys to disability services in all 482 cities and towns in the state of California, collecting 86 responses. The majority of disability services do report providing services that give them direct contact with their clients. Most, or 63%, of these agencies do not provide any abuse-related support services. Only one has a safe house or shelter. 6 of the 86 respondents provide emergency placements for abused clients, and only 4 services offer emergency replacement attendance, meaning someone who provides temporary care during a time of crisis. 80% of my respondents admitted to being mandated reporters, so it was shocking when over 55 revealed that they do not screen for abuse. So in other words, they know they serve women who are abused. They are mandated to report, but are unlikely to find out about it. Next slide, please. I received 81 responses to the domestic violence surveys that were sent to services in the 482 cities and towns in California. The results here are a little misleading because 88% responded by saying, yes, they do serve women with disabilities, but on average, they serve approximately 9 times fewer women with disabilities than their non-disabled peers. If we remind ourselves that the 3 to 11 times more likely women with disabilities are to being abused, we can gain a sense of how disproportionately underserved women with disabilities are in domestic violence services. Many of the agencies that responded to my surveys said they are structurally compliant by ADA standards, but only one agency will allow a woman to bring a personal attendant to provide daily living assistance. Nearly half of the domestic violence services do not train their staff on how to serve clients with disabilities. So they know they serve women with disabilities, but many service providers do not have the training or the resources to work with women with disabilities. Next slide, please. This is a visual representation of the 52 women with disabilities I've interviewed. I selected purple ribbons because it's a common symbol of domestic violence. The ribbons are different types and sizes to symbolize how diverse this group of women are. Some have physical disabilities, most have psychiatric diagnosis, some have invisible disabilities, and others have communication disabilities, which include blindness and deafness. Some of these women live independently, some need personal attendance, few are college students, others are university students, some are employed, others are unemployed, and some of these women are homeless. One of these women has died since her interview. Next slide, please. Emerging trends from all of the data revealed that women with disabilities are likely to be abused by multiple persons who are not typically considered intimate partners. They feel their disability status increases their vulnerability to abuse. Women with disabilities have less knowledge about how domestic violence services work or even exist at all. They are underserved by the domestic violence service delivery system and need similar supports as other survivors of domestic violence. This group of women experience high levels of social isolation and dependency on others. When this group of women reaches out to service providers, they often do not use the language the staff or volunteer behind the desk at the agency is accustomed to hearing, making it more likely that the woman will be turned away. Women fear not being believed and often feel as though they have little choice but to accept their circumstances. When APS is called, they often respond by referring some women to domestic violence service providers who may turn them away if their abuse was not perpetrated by an intimate partner, or APS may respond by sending women to assisted living facilities where women fear losing their autonomy, express feeling essentially incarcerated. They are likely to face more abuse and do not receive essential abuse support services like counseling or legal assistance. This means that women with disabilities are staying in abusive situations longer, with fewer opportunities to seek help from service providers, leaving women with little choice but to return to a dangerous situation, where they may wait many months, years, or possibly they may never have the opportunity to access services or seek help again. The domestic context of persons with disabilities often looks different than it does for their non-disabled peers. I argue that we need to redefine domestic violence to include the types of abuse perpetrated on women with disabilities within their social context. This abuse has the same dynamics of repetition, dominance, control, injury, and humiliation that exists within the domestic violence that occurs within an intimate partner relationship. For this reason, this group of women needs similar supports as other survivors of domestic violence. Furthermore, as long as this abuse is unrecognized and unaddressed, we are contributing to the invisibility of this group of women, segregating them based on their disability status. Next slide, please. I would like to end by reminding us that we have a vested interest in the treatment of people with disabilities, and that disability is a part of the human condition. Every person's designation as non-disabled is likely temporary. I would like to take a moment to thank all the women who shared their stories of shame, injury, and despair in the hopes of making a difference in the lives of others. Thank you, and thank you all for participating today.
Thank you so much, Anna. Now it is time for our question and answer session. And we have had several questions that have come up, but if a question you have for Anna or any of the other speakers occurs to you, go ahead and type it in the box, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. Before I turn it over to Anna Fortes to pose the first question, I just want to start off with a question for Anna Darzens. And this question came in yesterday. One of the participants who registered for the webinar today called and asked this question, and I thought it'd be a nice one to start our question and answer session. And Anna, she wanted to know whether there's any research that distinguishes between those whose disabilities are caused by injuries in military service as opposed to those who have disabilities that are developmental.
Sadly, I have not seen any, and I think that this is definitely an area where we have room for growth and for exploration, but I have not seen any research with that, exploring that intersection at all.
Okay, thanks. And Jennifer Sheehy, are you aware of any research that might make a difference in those two types of ways of acquiring a disability?
You know, that's a really good question because the statistics are so high. We don't have, I haven't seen research specifically on it, but we could certainly send you a link when we find out. We've got great relationships with some of our other researchers and federal agencies.
Okay, great. Anna Fortes in our Women's Bureau San Francisco office, do we have any questions from participants?
We do have a few questions. The first one is related to pregnancy leave, and perhaps, Rachel, you can weigh in. The question is, or starts off, my organization doesn't offer leave without pay for disability and or pregnancy to employees who are not eligible for FMLA. Those employees are terminated once their accrued vacation or sick time is exhausted, and they can reapply when they're cleared to work. Is there any legal mandate that prevents terminating these employees?
Sure. So it depends to some extent on what state you're in. In California, there certainly is. It requires employers with as few as 5 employees to provide up to 4 months of pregnancy disability leave while a woman is unable to work due to pregnancy. But I would caution that under the current iteration of the ADA, now that it has been amended and expanded, you might be at risk of violating the ADA by not providing any sort of leave while a woman is disabled due to pregnancy, especially if you would provide leave to someone else who had another type of disability that made them unable to work for a period of time, and you would provide them with unpaid leave as an accommodation. Then under Young and under the ADA Amendments Act, you likely would be required to provide that same consideration to someone who could not work because of pregnancy. So I would be cautious in doing that and likely kind of look at your organization's practices, because I think under the laws it's developing, well, one, if you're in California, certainly you do have to provide that time off if you have at least 5 employees, and that may be true in some other states as well. But outside of California, I think the ADA is quickly approaching a place, and with the interpretation of Young, where likely you could be in violation of the ADA for not providing some leave while a woman, cannot work due to pregnancy.
Okay, thank you so much, Rachel. Anna, any other questions?
Yeah, this one is focused on the definition of disability, and the question is, would shingles be considered a form of disability?
It could. It depends on whether it would limit a major life activity. I think it could. I think I've not seen anything specifically addressing shingles or any cases. There may be some out there, but I think under the expanded definition, if you weren't able to work and were limited in other life activities due to shingles, I think you could argue that it was a form of disability. Courts are still a little bit all over the place when it comes to the length of time you have to be disabled. I think it's pretty clear under the law and the amendments that short-term disability can still be a disability, but there's still some case law coming out on that. But I think you could argue in certain circumstances that it is a disability under the ADA as amended.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the next question, this could be answered by either Jennifer or Rachel. Can you share any best practices relating to light duty programs where an employer may provide light duty for work injuries and want to ensure the program is fairly administered in terms of the ADA or the Pregnancy Disability Act?
This is Jennifer, and I'll start just from our experience and also from some of the work that we've done in areas of customized employment. So customized employment basically means working with the strengths and abilities of the individual and the needs of the employer. And in the case of maybe return to work, or where someone has had an injury and is coming back to work, or someone ages into a disability, or they're hiring a person with a disability, there are oftentimes when you can look at the specific skills needed for the job, the specific duties, and say, what are the most critical for this job and that also meet the skills of the individual, and then look at ways of maybe taking some activities from someone else and giving them to that individual with a disability so that the activities that they are unable to perform can be shared by others. But it is a matter of making accommodations that include looking across an organization or across a segment of an organization and maybe distributing specific tasks differently.
Rachel, did you want to weigh in as well?
I would agree. I think I don't have too much to add on that, but I think that one of the important things is just to be very open to the individual needs of employees. Obviously, if you do have a light duty policy, then you should apply it equally regardless of the reason for an employee's inability to work. I think that's the lesson from Young. And but otherwise, even if you have a standard light duty policy, I always think it's important for employers to be open and willing to communicate with individual employees who need some modifications at work, to provide them with the sorts of modifications that would help them to work despite their particular disability or pregnancy-related condition. So it should be individualized when it needs to be, and so I think that that's important, just to be sure and have open lines of communication and make your employees feel comfortable coming to you to request accommodations as needed.
Okay, great. Any other questions, Anna?
Yeah, so the next question is related to the future of FMLA. The question is, how likely is it that the U.S. or California can adopt practices that other countries do to support pregnant or parenting families with more time to bond with their families without deeply impacting them financially?
I can take this one. We are behind for sure. I think we're making small strides. I know in California we've had some good luck with getting, in California you can take up to 7 months of leave. If you are disabled by pregnancy for 4 months, you can take that full 4 months. And then if you qualify for the California Family Rights Act, you can take an additional 12 weeks to bond. And so, we're making some headway. And I think we've been able to show to some extent, there have been some studies that show that taking this leave doesn't necessarily harm employers, even small employers. And so I think the more strides that we make, not only on a federal level, but just on state levels, that demonstrate to employers that it's not the end of the world and the sky will not fall, you know, maybe we'll eventually get there. I don't think it'll be fast, but I think we're slowly edging in that direction. It's so important. So that's a great question.
Thanks, Rachel. And I'll also add that New Jersey and Rhode Island are two states that also have some type of paid family leave for workers after the birth of a child. The Department of Labor is leading on leave, and the Women's Bureau currently has a grant program that provides funding to states that are looking at economic feasibility studies to explore how they can provide paid leave to their state workers. In the fall, we'll be having another webinar to share some of the results from last year's grantees and what they found, and then we'll also be awarding new grants to new states and municipalities at the end of this fiscal year. So there'll definitely be more information about that from the Women's Bureau coming out to you soon. Anna, any other questions?
Yeah, we're getting a lot of great ones coming in. The next question is, what would be the best method of helping someone with a disability who lacks awareness of their need?
Hi, this is Jennifer. I'll start this answer and hope others will add to it. So I would really encourage someone to look at the ODEP page, the ODEP website, dol.gov/ODEP. We have a lot of information about self-disclosure, not only from an employer perspective, but also from the individual's perspective. We've done quite a bit of research on attitudes about disability and towards people with disabilities, and every person has a different idea of what disability means in their head when you say the word. The more exposure they have to different types of disabilities or images of disability, they tend to become more aligned and realize how relevant it is to their own lives or their families or others. But there are lots of great resources for individuals and employers to not only create that inclusive environment, but to recognize whether it's appropriate for you to identify as having a disability. The other great resources, the one I talked about earlier, the Job Accommodation Network, even just perusing the website, they've got resources for dozens of situations and different disabilities and conditions. People use a lot of different terms for disability as well. That's all covered. They have, again, confidential one-on-one calling, phone help if somebody wanted to call and just chat about what they're facing at work or what they're facing in their lives, and some options for handling the types of activities that they want to do. And that's askjan.org.
Thank you, Jennifer. Anna Darzens, did you want to weigh in on that question as well?
Hello?
Hi, Anna. We can hear you now.
Okay. I'm sorry. You know, what I'd like to say is that that's one of the factors that is missing oftentimes, is that there isn't a lot of education and inclusion of persons with disabilities in their own in the addressing issues such as violence and abuse. So I think that education is a huge part of it, and so that's something that I don't necessarily see, is that is education about what violence looks like, how to address abuse, you know, what kind of resources exist, and it really adds to isolation of this population. So I think that that's something that's really missing and should definitely be included.
Okay, great. And Anna, did you receive any questions from any of the participants on the chat function that you want to take a minute to address as well?
Yeah, this one is just a question regarding the ADA on, how many employees must be employed by an employer for these laws, for the ADA to actually be effective.
Is this for anybody or?
Open to anyone.
Okay, this is Rachel. So currently the ADA does require that an employer have at least 15 employees in order for it to be applicable. However, there are many state versions of the ADA. For instance, in California, we have the Fair Employment and Housing Act that has very similar provisions and requirements, and that only requires an employer to have 5 employees.
Great, thank you. The next question is for Jennifer. Have there been any noticeable increase in ADA reasonable accommodations requests related to macular denigration specifically?
I don't know if specifically macular degeneration has been something that has prompted people to call the Job Accommodation Network. However, we do know that we've had an increase in not only people within individuals requesting information to make accommodations as they're aging, which is often when you see macular degeneration as well. We've gotten it from employers whose workforce is aging, people not retiring when they used to retire, about what types of technologies are available that support screen readers, that support large fonts, and certainly how to create an environment where that technology is not a special request every time. We do have a technical assistance center called the Partnership for Employment and Accessible Technology. We work with developers, we work with employers, we work with technology companies so that features that benefit people with disabilities, certainly vision disabilities are a big, big part of these features. We make sure that those features are built in at the very foundation, the beginning of the development of new technologies. So that's a fairly new technical assistance center that we have, but it's been extremely popular. And we did get about 60% of an increase of 60% in requests from employers in general, and we believe that's prompted by Section 503 and the new requirements for federal contractors.
Great, thank you. We have about 10 more minutes for questions. Anna, any other questions?
Yeah, this is directed to all panelists. Is there a national directory of attorneys that specialize in age, gender, and/or racial discrimination that you might be aware of?
This is Anna Darzens. Sadly, I don't have an answer to that. I don't know of any.
So there is a National Employment Law Center that I believe provides referrals for attorneys. We can make that resource available to you. We'll add it in the resource section to the slides, and we'll make the slides available on the Women's Bureau website.
Hi, this is Jennifer. There is an organization, the National Disability Rights Network, based in Washington, D.C., but that's an umbrella organization for the protection and advocacy centers that are present in every state throughout the country, and they do they are a resource if people are looking for assistance or legal help, and they can help direct.
Okay, great. Anna Fortes, any other questions?
Yeah, this next question is, when a pregnant woman is not eligible for FMLA and gets placed on bed rest, under the ADA, are employers required to grant the employee a leave of absence?
This is Rachel. Most likely, yes, because if someone is put on bed rest, it likely is because of a health condition that kind of puts it outside the realms of a quote-unquote normal pregnancy. And generally, we found that those types of conditions are qualifying as disabilities under the amended ADA. And so if the employer does fall under the ADA, which most do, or the state version of that, wherever your state is, then likely that would be considered a reasonable accommodation for that employee, and she likely would be covered by the ADA for purposes of needing that bed rest. And I'd also just like to add generally, and I think we're going to have these added to the slides later, so they'll be available. But if you go to our website, which is under my name in my slide, you can find the phone numbers for both the Work and Family Helpline and the Project Survive Helpline. And those, because I've seen there's a lot of questions about some of the pregnancy-related issues, and those helplines are really good resources. You can call and leave a message, and someone from our organization can call you back and talk to you about your questions related to pregnancy-related leave or accommodations, or family caregiving needs, or in the case of the Project Survive Helpline, needs related to employment issues with domestic violence, sexual assault, or stalking. So to the extent I can't get to any of your other questions today related to those issues, you can feel free to call our helpline, or if anything comes up in the future.
Thanks, Rachel. Any other questions, Anna?
Yeah, this question is about data or any research on women with disabilities and workplace violence. Where can one find this information?
Anna Darzens, it looks like your phone is muted, but I'm wondering whether that is a question that you could answer on workplace violence and women with disabilities.
Would you please repeat the question?
Sure. It's where can we find data or research on women with disabilities and workplace violence?
That's also an area that a lot of research and data isn't collected on. To be honest, this is kind of an emerging area or pool of knowledge. So there are a lot of things that we just don't know.
Okay. How about Jennifer Sheehy? Are you aware of maybe any specific resources that takes a look at workplace violence in women with disabilities?
So we believe there's a initiative it's called When Workplaces Respond at the Department of Justice. If they have an online web feature or link, we will send it to Kelly.
Okay, great. Anything else from you, Rachel Langston?
I don't know that we have anything specific on violence at the workplace for women with disabilities, but there has been some things done by, I want to think Legal Momentum. If you look at their website, has a lot of statistics about the violence, domestic violence at the workplace. I believe that's right. I'm happy to follow up later and with any other resources, but I don't know of anything specific relating to women with disabilities and violence at the workplace.
Okay. It looks like we might have time for one more question. Anna Fortes, do we have a final question?
Yeah, this is a question regarding resources for people with disabilities interested in employment. Are there resources for people who are homebound but want to be employed but have various disabilities?
Okay. This is Jennifer. There definitely are lots of jobs that people can do from a home setting or in an alternate work site. I would suggest a couple of resources. The vocational rehabilitation state agencies across the country, and you can go to rehabnetwork.org, to get a list of the state agencies in the state the person is interested in. Their job is to support people with disabilities in employment and help them connect and find resources. But the American Job Centers, there are more than 2,000 of them around the country, and those are the Department of Labor. The Department of Labor administers the law that oversees and creates the American Job Centers, and also several programs located at the American Job Centers. They also serve people with disabilities. They serve more people with disabilities than even the vocational rehabilitation agencies. And again, they have connections to employers. They can certainly direct somebody to employers that are doing call center work or have basically virtual offices so that the person could work from home.
Okay, great. Well, I think we're coming to the end of our time for this webinar, and so I want to take this moment to thank, again, all of our speakers, Jennifer Sheehy, Rachel Langston, Anna Darzens. We so appreciate you sharing your expertise with us today. We will make a recorded session available at a future date, and I thank you for tuning in with us today. You may now disconnect your phone and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you.